It was supposed to be a simple, quiet trip. Myself, Jack, and my buddy Mark had been planning this for months. We were going to hike deep into the Alaskan wilderness. We had all the gear, all the maps, and the adrenaline running through our veins as we drove past the last signs of civilization. The further we got, the more the world outside the truck seemed to disappear into the endless forest and jagged peaks. The sort of place where you could get lost in seconds and no one would find you. At least that's what we thought. We'd heard the stories, of course. Stories about people going missing, the strange sounds in the night, the things lurking just out of sight. But we weren't those kinds of guys. We were tough, prepared. Nothing could happen to us. But what we didn't know was that there were things out there that didn't care how prepared we were. Things that don't play by any rules. We set up camp on the edge of a frozen lake. A perfect spot. The air was so cold that it bit into your skin. The night sky black with only the faintest hint of stars. Mark joked about bears and wolves, but Jack and I didn't laugh. We were listening to the quiet. Then, around midnight, something snapped. The first noise came from the woods to the north. A crack, like a branch breaking, but it was too loud, too close. I looked over at Mark and Jack, and they were already frozen, eyes wide. None of us moved. Then, another crack, and another. It wasn't an animal. It didn't sound like anything we'd ever heard before. It was too deliberate, too precise. I told myself it was just a moose or a bear, but the air was thick with something else, something I couldn't put my finger on. We sat there, huddled by the fire, watching the tree line, waiting for whatever was out there to reveal itself. Then it came. Not a moose, not a bear, something else entirely. It was more like a whisper in the trees, an unnatural rustling that sent a chill down my spine. My heart was beating faster now. I could hear Jack's breath, shallow, erratic. Mark looked pale, his lips almost blue from the cold. "Stay calm," I whispered, but I could hear the trembling in my own voice. That's when I saw it. A shape, tall, too tall to be a bear, standing motionless behind a cluster of trees. I froze. My eyes couldn't leave it, but I didn't want to look either. It was too wrong. Its outline was blurred, distorted in a way that didn't belong in nature. And then it stepped forward. The moment it moved, everything changed. The ground seemed to shift beneath us, and a low, guttural growl echoed from the forest. A growl that made the hairs on my neck stand up. Jack and Mark were already scrambling, trying to get to the truck, but my legs wouldn't move. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the thing standing in the dark. I still don't know what it was, but I knew one thing for sure. Nothing in that forest wanted us there. I shouted at Jack and Mark to move faster. But as I turned to run, I heard it. The sound of something large, something heavy, following us through the snow. We were no longer the hunters. We had become the hunted. We didn't make it to the truck. I know it sounds crazy, but in that moment, when I turned and saw Jack and Mark already running full speed toward the vehicle, my brain couldn't register what was happening. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heart, the frantic crunching of snow underfoot, and the faintest echo of that growl, drawing closer with each passing second. I turned my head, just for a split second, and that's when I saw it again. The thing. It wasn't just standing there anymore. It was moving fast, like a shadow in the trees. The trees themselves seemed to bend, shift, as if the entire forest was alive, reacting to its presence. I couldn't tell you what it looked like, only that it was wrong. This form wasn't human, but it wasn't animal either. Its long limbs were like sticks, and its eyes, those eyes, I swear they glowed. "Run!" I screamed at the top of my lungs, and that's when I finally managed to move. I forced my legs into motion, pumping them as hard as I could, but I was already too far behind. Jack and Mark were ahead of me, but the thing wasn't focused on them. It was after me. I don't know how I knew, but I felt it. I could feel the ground shifting beneath my feet, the air thickening with something dark. It was coming for me, and there was no escape. I turned to look behind me again, and this time I saw the shadows closing in. The thing wasn't walking anymore. It was running. Its limbs twisted in unnatural ways, like the trees themselves had broken and reformed into something monstrous. couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was caving in. My legs burned with exhaustion, but I couldn't stop. I kept running. Ahead of me, Jack and Mark were at the truck now. I could see their headlights cutting through the dark. But I wasn't going to make it. Not in time. Not with that thing right behind me. The sound of its movement was like the cracking of ice, sharp and jagged. Then there was a scream. Mark. It was a scream like I'd never heard before. High-pitched, pure terror. It was cut off abruptly. Silence fell over the camp like a thick blanket, smothering everything. I kept running, faster now, adrenaline forcing my feet to move. But in that silence, something inside me broke. I couldn't make sense of what was happening. I reached the truck. My fingers were numb from the cold, shaking uncontrollably as I fumbled with the door handle. Jack was inside, his face ghostly pale, his eyes wide with terror. "Get in!" he yelled. But there was something wrong with his voice. Something off. It didn't sound like Jack. I turned toward the forest, my heart in my throat. Mark was gone. There was no sign of him, just the eerie stillness of the woods. And that's when I realized the thing was still out there. It wasn't done with us. Jack reached over and yanked me into the truck. He slammed the door shut and started the engine in a panic, his hands trembling on the wheel. But as we pulled away, I couldn't shake the feeling that the creature was still watching us. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw something that still haunts me. A pair of glowing eyes, just beyond the reach of the truck's headlights, staring back at me from the edge of the trees. We didn't talk the entire drive back. There was nothing to say. We knew. We were lucky to be alive. But we knew one thing for certain now. That thing, the thing in the Alaskan wilderness, it didn't let its prey escape. Not ever. We didn't speak much after the night in the forest, and I think we both knew why. The horror we'd witnessed wasn't something you could just shrug off. It wasn't some ghost story or an urban legend. It was real. Too real. And it was still out there, watching. The drive back to the nearest town felt like it took hours, though it was only about an hour away. The truck's headlights cut through the endless night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the thing from the woods was following us. Always just out of sight, just beyond the edge of the beam. Jack was gripping the wheel so hard his knuckles were white. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror every few seconds, as though checking to make sure the road behind us was clear. But I could see the panic in his face. He wasn't checking for other cars. He was checking for something else. We didn't stop for gas. Didn't stop for anything. When we finally reached the town, Jack pulled into a gas station, his face pale and sweaty. He didn't say anything, just sat there, staring ahead through the windshield like he was waiting for something. Waiting for something that didn't belong in this world to finally catch up with us. I don't know how long we sat there in that truck. Time seemed to stretch, but eventually, Jack pulled himself together enough to turn off the engine and get out. I followed, still shaking, but the weight of what had happened, what we had barely survived, felt like it was suffocating me. We had to tell someone. We couldn't just go on like nothing had happened. Not after that. We went inside the gas station, and the clerk behind the counter, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a thick beard, barely looked up from his magazine as we entered. His eyes flickered to us for a moment, then back to the pages. But there was something about the way he looked at us that unsettled me. It wasn't a casual glance. It was more like he had been expecting us. "You boys look like you've seen a ghost," he muttered, his voice low and gravelly. Jack stiffened, his jaw clenched. You could say that, he replied, his voice tight. "You ever hear of something out there in the woods? Something that isn't, right?" The clerk didn't even blink. He set the magazine down slowly and stood up from behind the counter. For the first time, he looked directly at us, and there was a strange knowing in his eyes, like he'd seen things far worse than we could imagine. "You boys aren't the first to ask about that," he said softly. "The woods up north? Ain't no place for anyone to be fooling around. Too many stories, too many disappearances." Jack's grip tightened on the counter. "What kind of stories?" The clerk's gaze shifted to the window, his face suddenly tense. "People who go into those woods, they don't always come back. Some of 'em do, but not like they were. And some never come back at all. Couldn't breathe. What do you mean? What's out there? The clerk paused for a long time. The seconds stretched into minutes. Finally, he spoke, and when he did, his voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know what it is, he said, his voice quivering, but it doesn't want to be found. And if you've seen it, it's already watching you. You won't get rid of it that easily. I turned to Jack, but he was already backing away from the counter, his face pale as a ghost. I wanted to ask more, wanted to know everything, but I could see the fear in Jack's eyes, and I knew there was nothing more to be said. We left the gas station quickly and got back in the truck. But as we pulled away from the small town, I felt that feeling creeping back. The feeling that it was out there, watching, and no matter how far we drove, no matter how many miles we put between ourselves and the Alaskan wilderness, I knew we weren't safe. It wasn't over, and it wasn't going to be until it got what it wanted. We tried to move on. We tried to go back to normal life, whatever that was after everything we'd seen. But the images, the sounds, the feelings wouldn't leave. Jack and I stayed in a small motel for the night after we left the gas station. I could tell he was still on edge, glancing at every shadow, every flicker of movement, as if expecting the thing to suddenly appear out of thin air. I didn't feel much different. Every small sound made my heart race. I kept checking the locks on the door, even though I knew there was no escaping what we'd seen. The next morning, we packed our things and drove further south. We weren't even sure where we were going anymore. Just anywhere but there. We didn't talk about the night in the woods. We didn't even talk to each other much at all. Every once in a while, I'd catch Jack staring at the rearview mirror, and I'd do the same. But there was nothing, just the road stretching ahead of us. But that feeling, that presence, it was still there, always just behind us. It wasn't until a week later that things took a turn for the worse. It started with the dreams. At first, it was just fragments, dark shapes, distorted limbs, that horrible whispering voice. But soon, the dreams became clearer. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest, feeling like I was still in that forest, running through the snow, being chased. But what scared me more than anything was the sensation that someone else was awake in the room with me. At night, I began hearing things. Soft scratching sounds on the walls, light tapping on the windows. It was always when I was just about to fall asleep. At first, I thought it was just the wind or the house settling. But the sounds grew too regular, too deliberate to be anything natural. I was about to ask Jack if he was hearing the same thing, but I stopped myself. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. I didn't want to hear that he was as terrified as I was. But then I heard it. A voice came from outside the room. Soft, low, almost a whisper. It was like it was calling my name. I froze. My heart stopped. I knew it was impossible, it couldn't be. But the voice was there, unmistakable. My name, drawn out slowly, like the wind, like the trees whispering to me. Jason. I jumped out of bed and ran to the window, heart hammering in my chest. I pulled the blinds back, scanning the parking lot below. There was nothing. No one. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there, just out of sight. The next morning, I found a note on the truck. It was simple, handwritten in large, scrawled letters. You can't escape. I tried to laugh it off, to convince myself it was just some twisted prank. But my stomach churned. I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. That night, we made the mistake of going out to a nearby diner. I don't know why we thought it would help. Maybe we were both desperate for normalcy. But as we sat there, eating in silence, I saw it again. A figure standing in the shadows outside, watching through the window. I knew it wasn't just my mind playing tricks. The eyes were glowing. The same haunting eyes I'd seen in the forest. Jack noticed it too. He stiffened, his eyes locked on the figure outside. We didn't say anything, just got up and bolted out of there, practically running to the truck. As soon as we pulled away from the diner, I checked the rearview mirror. It was there, the thing standing in the middle of the road, just beyond the reach of the headlights. I wasn't sure if it was the same creature, but I knew one thing. It was following us. We sped out of town, leaving the figure behind. But I couldn't shake the image from my mind. The glowing eyes, the way it just stood there watching us. It wasn't trying to catch us. Not yet. It was just waiting. Waiting for the right moment. And I knew deep down that there would be no escaping it this time. The days after the diner were the longest of my life. Every second felt like we were being hunted. And the worst part was we didn't even know how or when it would come for us. It was like being stalked by an unseen predator. One that didn't follow the rules of the natural world. Jack and I barely spoke. There was nothing left to say, and every conversation seemed to dig up more fear. We both knew that thing wasn't finished with us, that it wouldn't let us go so easily. But it was always just out of reach, always in the shadows. We decided to leave the town to head further south. We thought that maybe, if we could just put enough distance between ourselves and the wilderness, we'd be safe. It was a fool's hope, but it was all we had left. We drove for hours, through winding roads and lonely highways. The farther we went, the more I thought we were escaping. But even as the landscape changed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. One night, we stopped at a small cabin in the middle of nowhere. It was the kind of place that was far from everything, a little rundown with a flickering light inside. The owner, an older man who lived alone, didn't seem to mind that we showed up unannounced. He welcomed us in, made us some coffee, and let us stay for the night. First, it felt like a break from everything. The warm fire, the quiet of the cabin, the sense of being away from the world. But as soon as the sun set, the feeling of dread returned. Couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those eyes, those glowing, otherworldly eyes, staring at me from the dark. It was like it was everywhere, like it was inside my head, waiting for me to let my guard down. Then came the knock on the door. It was soft at first, almost like a tap, then harder and harder. It echoed through the cabin. Jack and I froze. We both knew it wasn't the wind. The door was locked, the window sealed. But the knocking didn't stop. "Who is it?" Jack called out, his voice shaking. No answer. Just the knocking. I don't know why, but I grabbed a flashlight and went to the door. I was terrified, but I had to know. I had to see what was out there. I opened the door a crack. Nothing. But the air was different. Felt heavier, colder. And then, in the distance, I saw it. The figure. It was standing in the woods just beyond the cabin, just like the night in the forest. Only this time, it wasn't hiding. It was standing tall, facing the cabin. I slammed the door shut and backed away, my heart in my throat. "Jack!" I shouted, but he was already beside me, his face pale as a ghost. He had seen it too. We didn't talk. We didn't need to. We both knew what was happening. We grabbed our stuff, ran out of the cabin, and jumped into the truck. The old man called after us, but we didn't stop. We didn't say goodbye. We just drove, as fast as we could. The figure followed us through the woods, always at a distance, never getting too close but never letting us forget it was there. We drove for hours, but the more we drove, the worse it got. The truck's headlights began to flicker, the engine sputtering as if it was losing power. The temperature dropped, and I could see my breath fogging in the air, even though the heater was on full blast. And that's when I heard it, a whisper like the wind. It was so faint at first, I thought I was imagining it, but then it grew louder, clearer. "Jason," my name once again. It was coming from the back of the truck. I didn't even have to turn around. I knew it wasn't Jack. "Jack?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. I was terrified to ask, but I had to know. "Did you hear that?" Jack didn't answer. He didn't even look at me. His knuckles were white on the steering wheel, and his eyes were locked straight ahead, as if he was trying to convince himself that if he didn't look, maybe it would go away. But I could see the fear in his face. He had heard it too. Then I heard the tapping, the same rhythmic tapping that had haunted me in the cabin. It was coming from the back of the truck now, like something was knocking from inside, tapping against the metal walls. I turned to look. Nothing, but I could feel it. Whatever it was inside the truck, watching us, waiting. I don't know how much longer I could take this. I was losing my mind. Felt like we were never going to escape. The thing was out there, and it was never going to stop. The road was endless, the darkness stretching out around us like a vast, suffocating blanket. We drove through the night, but it felt like no matter how far we went, we weren't getting any closer to safety. The whispers, the tapping, the cold, everything was closing in. Jack's hands were shaking on the wheel, but he kept pushing forward, his eyes wide and frantic. I couldn't tell if he was afraid of the thing outside or the thing that was slowly consuming his sanity from within. We were both on the edge. Then, just as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, we saw it. The thing. It wasn't in the woods this time. It was right there in front of us, standing in the middle of the road. It didn't move, didn't flinch as we approached. It just stood there, waiting. Jack slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt just inches away from it. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, every breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I turned to Jack, but he didn't even look at me. His eyes were locked on the thing, his face pale, his lips trembling. I don't know how I knew, but in that moment I understood. The creature had been waiting for us, not just to find us but to corner us, to force us into this final confrontation. I had no idea what to do. I wanted to scream, to run, to do something, but my body wouldn't move. I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. It was close now, just a few feet away from the truck, and I could see it more clearly than I had before. Its form was still distorted, like the trees had twisted and bent to create something unnatural. But its eyes, those eyes, they were real. They weren't glowing anymore. They were just eyes, human almost, but not. There was a depth to them that made my skin crawl, a knowing that made my blood freeze. "Jason," Jack whispered, his voice barely audible. I didn't answer him, couldn't, because in that moment, I knew something I couldn't explain. The creature wasn't there to kill us. It was there to take us. It stepped forward slowly, its limbs bending in ways that defied logic. It didn't make a sound, not even the rustling of leaves or snow. It was like it was made of air, moving through the world without disturbing it. And then, everything went silent. I don't know how much time passed. Maybe seconds, maybe hours. All I know is that I found myself standing outside the truck, my body moving like it wasn't my own. Jack was beside me, and I could see the same hollow look in his eyes. We were no longer in control. We weren't running anymore. We weren't even fighting. The creature reached out to us, its long fingers brushing against my cheek, cold as ice. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I understood. The creature wasn't just hunting us. It was part of us now. It had always been there, in the shadows of our minds, in the fears we tried to ignore. It was the thing we could never escape. We weren't meant to survive. We were meant to become part of it. We were the prey, but we were also the hunters, the ones who would carry the stories and the horrors with us,